6:18 a.m. Alex Usifo's name suddenly appeared beside terrifying words about cancer and a life-threatening condition. At 73, the word cancer alone is enough to make admirers fear the worst. But for Princess Usifo and the family who have shared decades of life with him, even the possibility of such an illness would carry a far more personal kind of pain. Yet there is one crucial fact that cannot be ignored. There is currently no reliable confirmation that Alex Usifo has terminal cancer or that his life is in immediate danger. Claims circulating as rumors must not be presented as a real medical diagnosis. But imagine what it means for a family to wake up and see the name of someone they love attached to words like terminal, cancer, and fighting for his life. What does a wife feel in that first silent moment? What happens when fear arrives before certainty? For generations of Nollywood viewers, Alex Usifo has represented strength. That unmistakably deep voice, the commanding presence, the serious expression that could dominate a scene before he even spoke. He seemed like the kind of man who could stand against anything, but the screen can preserve an image that time cannot. Behind the celebrated actor is a 73-year-old man moving deeper into old age, and behind that man is a family that knows him without the lights, cameras, or applause. Princess does not simply see the famous actor audiences recognize, she sees her husband, the man whose ordinary routines, familiar footsteps, quiet moments, and presence have become part of the rhythm of home. That is why an unverified report about a potentially deadly illness can feel so cruel. It forces people to imagine loss before there is evidence that such a loss is approaching. According to what can currently be established, there is no trustworthy source confirming a terminal cancer diagnosis, so the most painful part of this story may be the uncertainty itself. Is he well? Has something changed? Is the family frightened by the same words spreading outside their home, or are strangers constructing a tragedy that does not exist? Every unanswered question makes the silence heavier. Perhaps somewhere that morning, a phone screen glowed on a table while the house remained quiet. Perhaps Princess passed it without touching it. Outside, Alex Usifo remained the powerful Nollywood figure remembered by millions. Inside, there was simply a husband, a father, a 73-year-old man, and a family confronted by the frightening reminder that age eventually makes even the strongest people appear vulnerable. And as the morning light slowly reached the room, one disturbing phrase remained glowing on that unattended screen. While beside it, there was still no medical confirmation telling the family or anyone watching from afar what was actually true. Long before the frightening rumors began attaching words like cancer and life-threatening to Alex Usifo's name, audiences knew him for something entirely different: strength. Go back through the years and the image is unmistakable. A younger Alex walks into a scene, his posture firm, his expression controlled, and suddenly the atmosphere changes. He did not always need to shout. Sometimes that deep, commanding voice was enough. Sometimes a stare was enough. Across his long acting career, viewers became accustomed to seeing him portray men with authority: stern fathers, powerful figures, intimidating personalities, characters capable of making everyone around them uncomfortable with only a few words. On television, Alex could appear almost untouchable. But when the cameras stopped rolling and the door of the family home closed, Princess Usifo knew a different man. Not a character. Not the imposing Nollywood figure recognized by strangers. Her husband. We should be clear that the following details are a reconstructed domestic image rather than documented events. Imagine a familiar chair in a quiet room, a family meal after a long day, or that unmistakable voice speaking not from a movie screen, but across the table. These ordinary moments rarely become headlines, yet after more than 3 decades together, they are the pieces from which a marriage is built. Princess has watched years pass beside the same man audiences watched grow older on screen. His face changed gradually. The years became visible. Roles came and went. Generations of younger performers arrived. And somewhere between premieres, film sets, and ordinary evenings at home, time kept moving. Now Alex is 73. That number changes the way people look at even the strongest person. Does a wife begin noticing how slowly her husband rises from his chair? Does a family listen differently when he says he is tired? Does an ordinary silence suddenly feel longer than it once did? None of these imagined details prove illness, and there remains no reliable confirmation that Alex Usifo is suffering from terminal cancer. But aging itself can change the emotional mathematics of a family. At 30, another year feels almost guaranteed. At 73, birthdays can carry gratitude and an uncomfortable awareness that time is no longer endless. Perhaps that is why frightening health rumors can cut so deeply. They attack the distance between the powerful public image and the vulnerable private human being. Fans may still remember Alex standing tall beneath studio lights, delivering lines with absolute authority. Princess may remember something quieter. The voice after the performance was over, the conversations no audience heard, the years accumulated between two people. And if we imagine the house late in the evening, one picture remains particularly haunting. The television screen showing a younger Alex Usifo, strong and commanding, while somewhere across the room sits the familiar chair belonging to the 73-year-old man he eventually became. More than 3 decades. That is the distance we have to understand before imagining what frightening health rumors could mean inside Alex Usifo's family. Alex and Princess Usifo are reported to have married in 1993, and their family grew to include 4 children. But 30-plus years cannot truly be measured by a wedding date or the number of children written in a biography. It is measured in ordinary mornings, celebrations, disagreements, journeys, changing faces in family photographs, and thousands of evenings that no camera ever recorded. Princess has lived beside Alex through a remarkable transformation. She knew the man building his name as an actor, then watched him become a recognizable Nollywood presence, and eventually a veteran whose face and voice carried decades of history. Yet while audiences watched a career developing, a wife was also watching something far quieter. Time leaving its marks. Hair changes, faces mature, children grow, birthdays arrive faster. The man who once seemed permanently young becomes a husband in his 70s. At 73, Alex may still carry the commanding presence audiences remember, but age introduces a question that every long marriage eventually has to confront. How much time remains? That question becomes especially painful when unverified claims about terminal cancer begin circulating. There is still no reliable evidence establishing that Alex Usifo has terminal cancer or is currently facing a life-threatening cancer diagnosis. And it would be wrong to transform speculation into medical fact. But the fear created by such a possibility is easier to understand when we consider what Princess could potentially lose. Not a celebrity, not merely an actor, a companion of more than 30 years, the father of their children, the familiar presence woven into the architecture of everyday life. No hospital corridor is needed to make that possibility frightening. Imagine, not as a documented event, but simply as a visual representation of that fear. A quiet living room at the end of the day. Family photographs remain exactly where they have always been. Everything appears normal. Then the eye reaches one familiar chair. For decades, someone has occupied that space, spoken from it, rested there, perhaps watched television from it. Now imagine it empty. Suddenly, the frightening part of growing older together becomes visible. The longer two people share a life, the more deeply one person becomes embedded in the other's definition of home. And perhaps this is why rumors involving illness can feel so brutal. They force a family to picture an absence before there is any reason to believe that absence has arrived. Somewhere between the photographs of 1993 and the image of Alex at 73 lies an entire marriage. And at the far end of that imagined room, the empty chair remains untouched. It can begin with only 2 words, Alex Usifo and cancer. Nothing more. No medical report, no statement from the family, no verified diagnosis. Yet once those words appear together online, something disturbing can happen. One post becomes another. A vague health claim becomes serious cancer. The next headline makes it terminal cancer. Then someone adds, fighting for his life. Soon, another version describes unbearable pain or suggests that the family is preparing for the worst. With every repetition, the story becomes darker, more dramatic, and strangely more certain, even though the evidence has not changed. This is where the tension surrounding Alex Usifo becomes impossible to ignore. At present, there is no reliable basis for saying that the 73-year-old Nollywood veteran has terminal cancer or is facing an immediate life-threatening cancer diagnosis. That distinction matters. But imagine the emotional shock from the family's perspective. Imagine Princess reaching for her phone one morning and seeing the name of the man she married in 1993 beside phrases such as terminal stage, in terrible pain, or even may not survive. Imagine one of their children encountering the same words before hearing anything from home. What would happen in those first few seconds? Fear? Anger? Confusion? Would you immediately call the person you love just to hear their voice? Again, this is not a claim that Princess or the Usifo children actually experienced such a moment. It is a reconstruction designed to show the human cost of an unverified health story. Because once a rumor becomes emotionally powerful enough, people often remember the frightening headline while forgetting the uncertainty underneath it. And cancer is a particularly heavy word. Attach terminal to it, and the audience begins imagining hospital rooms, suffering, and death. Attach life-threatening, and suddenly an aging actor is no longer being discussed as a living person, but almost as someone already being mourned. That is the dangerous gap at the center of this story. What has been confirmed versus what people are being encouraged to believe. On one side stands a real man, Alex Usifo, 73 years old, with a wife, 4 children, and decades of life behind him. On the other stands an expanding digital narrative whose darkest claims remain unverified. As evening arrives, imagine a phone lying face up on a table. The screen is filled with frightening words. Beside it sits an old family photograph, untouched and silent. One contains a life actually lived. The other contains a story spreading faster than anyone can prove it true. For a moment, forget the frightening headlines. Forget the word terminal. Forget the images that rumors can force into our minds. There does not need to be a fabricated cancer diagnosis for Alex Usifo's story at 73 to carry emotional weight. Age itself changes the conversation. 73 is an age when time begins to feel different, not because death must be approaching, and not because illness should automatically be expected, but because decades already lived become impossible to ignore. Look back at Alex's journey before the camera. Year after year, role after role, audiences watched the face change while something familiar remained in that commanding presence. People who first encountered him when they were young have grown older themselves. Some built careers, raised children, became grandparents, and still recognize that voice the moment it reaches the screen. To those viewers, Alex is connected to memories larger than a single film. He belongs to an era of Nollywood they remember personally. That is why even an unverified suggestion of serious illness can create immediate fear among fans. They are afraid of losing an artist who has occupied a corner of their memories for years. But inside a family, the weight would be entirely different. Princess does not measure Alex through performances. Their children do not experience him primarily as a veteran actor. If the family were ever confronted with a genuine health problem, and there is no reliable confirmation that Alex currently has terminal cancer, their fear would concern a husband and a father. The difference sounds small until you picture it. A fan can replay an old performance. A family cannot replay breakfast together. An audience can preserve a famous voice through films. Princess cannot replace the voice that has belonged to the ordinary rhythm of more than 3 decades of marriage. And as that thought settles, the pace begins to rise again. What happens when public affection and private fear collide? What happens when strangers begin mourning someone whose family has announced no such tragedy? What happens when age is treated as evidence of illness? At 73, Alex Usifo does not need an invented diagnosis to remind people that time is moving. His career already tells that story. Younger photographs, older performances, changing generations, a face gradually carrying more years. Perhaps somewhere tonight, a viewer will watch one of his old scenes and suddenly notice how young he looked. Somewhere else, a family photograph may show Alex surrounded by the people who know him without scripts or cameras. And between those two images, the actor preserved on screen and the husband growing older at home, there remains a quiet distance that no headline can truly measure. Alex Usifo has spent much of his life becoming other people. That is the strange privilege of an actor. A script arrives, a character is created, the cameras begin rolling, and for a few hours Alex can step into another man's fear, authority, anger, or pain. When the scene ends, he can walk away from that borrowed life. But there is one role no actor can hand to someone else: growing old. At 73, time belongs to Alex alone. Princess can stand beside him. Their children can surround him. Admirers can send prayers and wishes for many more healthy years, yet none of them can carry his years for him. None can take one birthday from his shoulders or give him one of their younger mornings. And perhaps this is where the story becomes painful without needing to invent a hospital bed, chemotherapy session, doctor's warning, or medical test. There is still no reliable evidence confirming that Alex Usifo is suffering from terminal cancer or is currently dying from the disease. But uncertainty has its own cruelty. Imagine the helplessness, not as a claim about what the Usifo family has actually experienced, but as the human reality behind such rumors of watching thousands of strangers discuss someone you love as though his final chapter has already been written. Terminal. In pain. Fighting for his life. Dying. 4 phrases can transform a living human being into a tragedy before his family has publicly confirmed any tragedy at all. What can Princess do against that? What can 4 children do when repetition begins masquerading as evidence? They could stand beside their husband and father, but they cannot personally correct every screen, every post, every frightened whisper. And the deeper pain lies in what those words force people to imagine. Loss. An empty place at the family table. A voice no longer answering from another room. A familiar presence reduced to photographs and memories. Again, these are symbols of potential loss, not events that have occurred. Yet after more than 30 years of marriage, even imagining such absence carries enormous emotional weight. Alex could portray grief on screen because a director could eventually call cut. Princess could never perform her husband's aging in his place. Their children could never take his journey and divide it among themselves. Time offers no understudy. So one question rises above every rumor. What is more frightening for a family? A disease that has actually been confirmed, allowing them at least to confront reality together, or thousands of people believing that the person they love is already dying when no such truth has ever been publicly established? Somewhere, an old scene of Alex continues playing. He looks powerful, untouchable. The scene ends, the screen turns black, and for several seconds the reflection staring back is no longer a character at all. And then one detail forces the entire story to change direction. After all the frightening language, after the imagined absence, after words such as terminal and life-threatening have created the impression of a man standing at the edge of death, we have to return to what can actually be established. Alex Usifo has continued to be associated with professional activity and screen projects in recent years, including works connected with the 2025-2026 period. That fact does not prove that his health is perfect. A film credit cannot function as a medical report, and professional activity tells us very little about what a person may experience privately. But it does expose the danger of constructing an entire deathbed narrative without reliable evidence. There is no credible basis here for describing Alex as a terminal cancer patient hovering between life and death. Suddenly, the emotional center shifts. Perhaps we are not watching Alex Usifo disappear. Perhaps we are simply watching Alex Usifo grow older. The difference is only a few words, yet those words transform everything. One version demands hospital corridors, desperate relatives, and an approaching farewell. The other requires nothing artificial at all. It asks us to look at a man who has spent decades before the camera and recognize what time has quietly done. The younger face becomes an older one. The actor once entering the industry becomes the veteran younger performers recognize. Audiences who discovered him years ago now carry gray hair and memories of their own. Princess, after more than 3 decades of marriage, has experienced that passage of time from much closer than any fan ever could. Their children have watched the same transformation not through movie credits, but through family life. And this is where the story becomes quieter, but perhaps heavier. There is no need to invent terminal cancer to make aging emotional. No artist, however powerful his screen presence, can remain outside time. Every performance becomes older. Every photograph eventually belongs to another decade. Every familiar voice carries more history. So instead of asking how close Alex Usifo may be to death, perhaps the more truthful question is harder. Why are we so uncomfortable simply watching the people we admire grow old? Imagine 2 images placed side by side. In the first, a younger Alex stands before the camera, shoulders straight, his expression commanding. In the second is Alex decades later, still carrying the same recognizable presence, but now with 73 years behind him. Nothing catastrophic needs to happen between those photographs. Time itself fills the space. And somewhere beyond both images, another year is already moving quietly toward him. 11:17 p.m. The room has finally fallen silent. No hospital corridor, no emergency lights, no terminal diagnosis being announced, no prediction about death, just silence. On the table rests an old photograph of Alex Usifo, taken when his hair, his face, and even the intensity in his eyes belonged to another era. Look at that photograph long enough, and it becomes difficult not to think about everything that has happened since. Years before the camera. Characters that came and disappeared. Audiences that grew older with him. A marriage stretching across more than 3 decades. Children who were once small enough to be gathered around their parents and who have since grown into adults with lives of their own. A short distance from that photograph is the image of Alex at 73. The same man, yet visibly separated from his younger self by time. Princess has traveled much of that distance beside him. She has not watched his life through movie scenes or headlines, but through the ordinary accumulation of years. Outside this imagined room, stories about illness may continue circulating. One headline may sound cautious, another may use the word cancer, another may push further, describing a terminal condition or suggesting that his life is in danger. But inside this reconstructed scene, none of those claims becomes medical fact. There is no health record opened before the camera. No doctor enters to confirm a diagnosis. No family statement transforms speculation into certainty. There is only time, and time requires no headline to make itself felt. The imaginary camera moves slowly toward the younger Alex in the photograph. For a few seconds, his face fills the frame. He looks almost permanently preserved there, untouched by everything that came afterward. Then the camera begins pulling back. The photograph becomes smaller. The room becomes visible again. Beside the table stands a chair. Still there. Still ordinary. Still carrying none of the tragedy strangers might have imagined for it. At 73, Alex Usifo does not need to be turned into a dying man for his story to remind us of something uncomfortable. Even the people who once appeared indestructible eventually grow older before our eyes. The light in the hallway dims. The room becomes darker. And the final question is no longer, is Alex Usifo dying from cancer? There is no reliable evidence here to justify that claim. The question is quieter and far more universal. When someone we once imagined would always remain strong begins growing older in front of us, are their family and the people who love them ever truly prepared for what time will eventually bring? The camera stops at the chair. Nobody sits down. Nothing moves. And for several more seconds, the frame simply remains there.